so serious?
Why so serious? Hello, I'm Microsoft MVP Tom Morgan, and this is a special one today because I'm joined by two Microsofties. I'm joined by Garry and Waldeck. Gentlemen, would you like to introduce yourself? I'm going to start with Garry, if that's all right, because you're in the middle of the screen.
Fair enough. Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Garry Trinder. I'm a developer advocate working at Microsoft, focused on Microsoft 365, but also one of the members of the Dev Proxy team.
Excellent. And Waldeck, over to you.
Hey everybody, basically I am exactly the same, different name, but doing exactly the same thing. I'm also an advocate for developer advocate for Microsoft 365 at Microsoft, and also since the very beginning working on Dev Proxy.
Excellent. And you guys even dressed the same for today's call, so that's perfect.
Yes, we have a memo. We have the same thing going on.
It's the Dev Proxy uniform, right?
Yes.
So we are going to be talking all about Dev Proxy. That's the reason for this call, and that's the reason why I asked Garry and Waldeck to join us, because yes, they've been working on it really since the very beginning. Now, if you don't know what Dev Proxy is, taking directly from the documentation, I'm going to read out one sentence and I'll ask you guys to kind of fill in. Dev Proxy is an API simulator that helps you effortlessly test your app beyond the happy path. And I kind of smiled when I read that because I think as developers, we can all kind of associate and empathize with the happy path and the ones that you show your boss when it comes to the end of sprint demos and all those things. What's the Dev Proxy for in that world, and how can it help? You're being very polite, both of you. Garry, go for it.
Who's going first?
Yeah.
Well, it's exactly that, right? We spend all our time building our applications. We're under sometimes different pressures for the work that we're doing. Yes, I've written this code. It works. Look, I've showed it. The other side is, well, what happens if it doesn't quite work as intended? What happens if some of the things that we depend on stop functioning, or they exert different behaviors than what we've gone through in development, right? We're developing, like, especially Microsoft 365, development tenant of just one user. You hitting the graph, generally things are pretty fine. You've not exerted the application, so everything's good, right? And then you put it in production and then everyone starts using it. The real world comes along and errors get thrown, you get throttled. Does your application stand up to that? So Dev Proxy is there to essentially enable you now to really easily test for those scenarios. So things like errors and throttling behaviors become something that you could just enable, right? We give you a magic button, the magic throttle button or the magic error button, that you can then just test your application. So it makes it really easy for you to just test outside of that happy path and just say, okay, well, what happens if we throttle? What's the user experience going to be like? Are we going to save things? Are we going to retry? We don't want users to lose data, right? We don't need that assumption. We want to verify that everything that we've written will work under these conditions and make these resilient apps. So that's really where we fit in that scenario. Anything more to add, Waldeck?
I think you put it together well, right? So again, to recap, the idea is that you build an app, and these days it's really hard to imagine an app that is not connected to an API, especially as we build apps that run in a cloud. The APIs run in a cloud too. And again, everything works fine until it doesn't. And the problem is it's insanely hard to replicate these errors because, again, like when you are, let's say, inexperienced dev, you're happy to just get things to work. The more you learn, you get more experience, you learn about all these things, all the things that can go wrong in a cloud. And that's just physics. Things can go wrong, period. And there's nothing you can do about it. So then you will think about things like, resilience, like let's add patterns in the code that will, retry, recover, and so on. But how do you know that the code you actually wrote towards that end actually works? You can, you can, but we found that it's disproportionately hard to be able to test that, given your goal of trying to build a good app for a customer. So that was exactly like the calling that we got. We need to solve this. This shouldn't be so hard.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and it's a very real problem, like, that people have, and it's often, if you've not done it before, and even if you have and you can't get the ear of your project manager or whatever it is, you find these things in production. Like you're always going to find them. It's like choose where you want to find them, right? Do you want to find them in production or do you want to find them in development? And I think that's why. So I really like Dev Proxy because it's the thing I've been wanting to build for ages. Like when I worked in ISV land, we so nearly built this a few times because it's, it was the thing. It was like, well, how do we test our throttling code? Like, how do we test our resiliency code? Because when you've got a dev tenant that always works and you're doing a scale of like 1 or 2 at a time, you never hit those things, right? You've got to try quite hard to hit some of these throttling limits. So either you just put it into production and hope, or like something like, and yeah, we talked about doing this a few times and just could never get the budget for it. So I think these are really common problems. And so I think it's really good that the Dev Proxy exists and it's come out of Microsoft because it's a recognition of what are common problems. Waldeck, I know I sort of saw somewhere that this whole thing started as a Microsoft hackathon project back in 2022, I think. So I think for folks who don't know, so Microsoft runs internal hackathons regularly. Is that a thing?
Correct. So basically, if you look at Microsoft, like we are split kind of in 2 big orgs. You could say, like from the tech point of view, there is the Azure org and there is the E&D org, which does Windows and Microsoft 365, right? And basically, the E&D org has something that they call Fix, Hack, Learn, which is I think a hackathon that they do 3 times a year or more. On the Azure side, we only do 1 hackathon across the year, which is the one for everyone, right?
Mm-hmm.
So basically, we being advocates for Microsoft 365, coincidentally, are in the Azure org, which is kind of interesting. But that thing aside, right? So yes, that was indeed the hackathon. It was like this seems to be like a great chance for us to give it a try and see how far we can come within a week, right? Because the hackathon takes a week, and within a week, you're supposed to come all the way from an idea to something you can show, whether that's a prototype, a video, a Figma file, working code, whatever you want to do. And basically you submit that and hope for the best.
Cool. And you did it. And is that where it started? Like it just went really well and everyone was like, yep, this is the thing we should lean into. And
if only, right? So when you think about like the way proxy works, it's exactly what it's called. It's a web proxy that you run on your box. When you read about it, like how it works, well, it attaches itself to the network stack and it's going to intercept web requests on your box. That's really cool because it's not related to technology stack that you use. You can build your app in any programming language on any tech stack. As long as that thing issues a request over the network stack, we can see it and react to it, which makes it really versatile and applicable to anybody. The caveat, though, is you heard it on the network stack. Over in the first 2 or 3 days, I learned more than I ever wished for about sockets and TCP protocol and HTTP handlers, and I didn't move a needle at all. I was stuck. And then we found this open source hybrid that we use that kind of gave us the baseline with like the ability to intercept a request, handle HTTPS, SSL trimming, and so on, and then allowed us to build on top, actually solve the problems that we wanted to solve.
Nice.
So that was kind of the lucky find that we had, without which we wouldn't be able to do it, or it would have taken us way more time, because TCP, my background is building web apps. TCP stack is like 3 levels below what I do every day. I was not experienced in that space at all. So it wasn't trivial. It was genuinely hard.
Yeah, I can imagine. From the very little we looked at it, it was it was more than we could do in a sprint, and that's why we never did it. So yeah. And so the thing that's really surprised me as well about the Dev Proxy team is your pace is quite fast. Like the features you put them out quite quickly, and you're up to some insane version number. What are you guys like? You know what I mean? Like, is it? How does that work? Yeah, right. Well, because you've got other jobs, right? You do other things. You're developer advocates. Like, is this part of developer advocacy? Is it a separate team? Like, are you all doing other things? And like, how is it a big team, small team? Like, do you have product managers and testers? And like, how does How does it work?
Yes, we do, and we have all of them in this call.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
It's like a startup is
Yeah.
the way that you
Yeah.
can think about it, right?
Yeah.
We do everything on the product. So
Yeah.
if it likewise features, but also documentation as well, keeping that up to date, making sure that you can use the software as easy as possible as well. So we're always looking from that perspective of how can we make things easier? How can we make it so that it's like, you need to test, you're under pressure. Sometimes just make it so that it's very quick and easy to just say, hey, I can run Dev Proxy and I can just try something, right? We want to make it so it's at that level. And all those kind of product decisions, whether it's features that we're working on, like, or where we spend our time is down to the both of us. And yes, we do have other jobs, and like the idea was born from a hackathon, but within developer advocacy, we are working on this tool as well. It is part of our work to help developers through our samples as well. So we've started to use Dev Proxy where we're needing to mock an API where we just wanting to test some code as well. So it's not just about errors and API behaviors, but being almost like a developer toolkit as well, if you're working with APIs like Graph or even custom APIs as well. So there's lots of things to this tool. It's kind of like an onion, right? As you start using it, start looking at errors, oh, it does this thing, and oh, it does this thing as well.
It's like a Swiss Army knife. You can apply it to lots of different situations for sure.
Exactly, yeah. And the pace of releases is something that we've discussed as well. We want to make sure that we're putting features out there when we get feedback from people as well, show that there is life in this product. We haven't just built it and then we're not going to talk about it again. We genuinely want this tool to be useful for developers, and we're always keen to hear feedback from anyone who is using it so that we can make it better going forward.
No, it's good. I think it is a really important part of developer advocacy. I think providing tools to help developers. I think you are doing developer advocacy by doing it. But it feels like a labor of love as well, which is really nice. So it feels like you want to do it, which is cool.
Yeah, it is. And I guess for a part, it's like we scratch our own itch, right? Because like some of the things that we include in it come exactly as you Garry said, from our own need. Like we build a sample, we need an API. We build a sample, we need to test some code, like how is it going to connect to an API that is secured with Entra, right? So all the different things that are included in there, we need that too for our own work. And again, that's something that we find time and again. It's way too hard. Like if I want to build a sample and the core of the work being sample itself, before I get to do that, I need to build an API, register an Entra app for it, secure it, set it up, and only then I can build sample. It's a waste of time, if you like. So if anything else, and that's that's at least for me, I think that's a character trait. It's just the way I tick. I love building tools that make things easier. Like whenever I see things like this is too hard, this needs to be easier. There has to be a way, whether that's a script or a tool, something small, something big. And then what's really cool about this one is that when we began the hackathon, there wasn't like a grand vision, like want to take over the world and for this to become a thing. But then once you start, you build it with an idea or you build a feature, you put it out there, you listen, and then you learn, oh my God, like we could also do this. That is also a thing. And that is also like a nascent thing to us. Hence, it would make sense for us to include it too, to address that developer pain too. And as we do that, like we evolve and we get more ideas and it makes that thing grow, right? So while we have a direction where we want to go, that also allows us to say no to some things. It's not like we have, 3-year down the road vision, a roadmap, like this is the one to go, because things just evolve too fast for that. Things change. So even if we did have a vision like that, it would become obsolete within months.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like you're in that sweet spot, right? Of like, you're not so big that you've got like roadmap and budget and people and marketing and all that stuff. Like you can be, we're going to do this because it's the right thing to do. Let's do it and move on. And yeah. I was going to ask like where some of your ideas came from, because they always, very often they seem to like land exactly and like they really resonate. Like I remember it was a while ago now, but like the feature where like it can just kind of watch the calls you're making. This is for Graph, like watch the calls you're making and then tell you what permissions you need to ask for. Like so useful, like so good. That's a thing every enterprise dev needs. So yeah, like when I saw that, it's like, oh, these guys get it. Like it's really good. Yeah.
And those kind of things, like I've just come off the back of being at European Collaboration Summit. I did a session on Dev Proxy, and it's always interesting to see the reaction in the room when you show like, oh, this is how Dev Proxy works, like errors and things. And then you show the permissions and it's like, oh, okay, that's really interesting. And a few people came up to me and said, I've literally just done that. We just spent the time going through like Graph Explorer, making the request, but doing it all manually to just find out, well, what permissions do we actually need? All that is now is just run the app, because we don't require you to make any any code changes, because we're just looking at the network, right? So it doesn't matter if you're, rolling your own HTTP client or using an SDK. It doesn't matter to us. We just see the URL, which then, we can do the heavy lifting for you, right? To say, hey, let's just check against the database. Let's go get the graph permission and then present that back to you for all of the requests that you've just sent through. So it could be, everything. It could just be one, however many requests you want to make. And like I say, back to that, just making it really easy. Like, you don't have to change anything. You just have to run proxy with a particular configuration and then send some requests.
Yeah. And the other thing is like, if you're the security person, and like your developer's given you this massive list and you're like, are you sure about this? Like you can go back to them and be like, no, run this. You show me, you prove to me you need all these that you're asking for. Because like that's also a big thing in enterprise dev. It's like developers over asking because like they know like it takes 3 weeks to get it signed off and they've got some plans for the future. So they might as well ask now. Like, yeah, that's the thing. So yeah.
Yeah, and I guess this is also one of the things that is, again, improportionally hard, right? Because like every single time you add an API call, that one call could affect your whole set of the minimal scopes that you need. And the only way for you to go to find out what you do is to keep at any point in time a list of all API calls across all of your code. And doing that like in a manual way on any reasonably sized app is very hard. It costs a lot of time. When you choose to automate it and do a code analysis thing, it's hard because there are so many ways in which you can call an API. You can concatenate the URL, and you will not know, or you will have a really hard time trying to guess the full URL during analysis, right? So all of these things are either extremely hard to implement, extremely hard to do right, and with like, and it's exactly, Tom, as you said, everybody has that need, because people need to it should come, if you ask us, it should come at zero cost for you to be able to evaluate that and ensure that you deploy secure app with minimal scopes to production. And that's kind of the need that we wanted to address with that, is to basically bring that cost down and basically make it zero effort. If you have, let's say you've got automated tests, right? Let's say you use a framework like Playwright, where you can automate the UI test. You have everything that you need in order to ensure the minimal scopes, because these tests will create API calls, because they will hit every part of your app, because you will test that anyway. Off of these API calls, we can then do additional analysis, and it doesn't cost you any additional effort beyond set it up initially. And as your app grows, you have everything in place. You don't need to do anything else. So that is kind of the mentality that we've got. Like, let's make these hard, untestable things easy and as close to zero cost as we can.
For me, Dev Proxy started off as a thing you put to test your interactions with Graph. And I know it's kind of expanded out now to become way more generic. But how does that work with Graph? Like, are you making generic things like the throttling or the errors? Are they totally generic? Are they tied to Graph? Like, do you, like, for instance, like, do you use like the Kyoto stuff to like figure out like how close do you tack to Graph, or is it not necessary? Like, for that, can you dig into like the underlying of like how that works? Because it feels like magic.
Well, it's not magic, unfortunately, but yeah, secrets.
ChatGPT magic.
But yeah, I guess the distinction is, yes, we very much started with graph. That was actually one of the things based in the hackathon that we wanted to solve, and then we expanded. We designed Dev Proxy to use like a plugin system. So think of a plugin as like an API behavior, right? So you would configure Proxy, say, hey, I want to use these plugins, and we have generic plugins and we have graph specific plugins. So actually in our documentation, you'll see that where the specific graph plugins are. So when you're wanting to do permissions, for example, that's a specific piece of functionality in Dev Proxy, and we actually have like a local database that's installed on your machine as part of the installer, so that we can go and make those checks of like, hey, you did this graph call, and this needs this permission. So we have very specific things around like mocking as well for graphs. So, making sure that the shapes are all correct. There's other things like the other minimal permissions is not only checking to see which permission you need, but the other side of it, which is you've already got a token that you're sending over the wire when you're making these requests. Is that over consented? Which scopes don't you need? So from the other side, it's making sure that you're not getting extra scopes, and that actually for that request you're only sending a token with permissions for what you need. So from that sense, yeah, that's all split out. So we've got like a generic mocking as well. We've got generic rate limiting, but we've also got graph rate limiting. In fact, to go beyond graph, we've actually got ODSP plugins as well. And these all come bundled with Dev Proxy as part of like our presets. So we have like predefined configurations. We have one for M3, which is all the graph plugins, ODSP plugins as well, that you can just enable or disable, but it's there as a great starting point if you're doing M365 dev. But also, again, then we've got another specific configuration for graph rate limiting as well, so that we're giving you as much as we can out of the box if you're an M365 dev, but then leaving it open to say, actually, if you're wanting to use Dev Proxy with a custom API that you're building, or you're building M365 apps and you've still got a custom API, right? You can use both. You can mix and match. Yep. So that's where we've really thought about how do we make it flexible. Let's not just tie everything to graph. You can add graph if you want, but that's down to you and how you want Proxy to behave.
That's cool. That makes sense. Yeah. And presumably you could write your own plugins like on top of the generic one, right? If you wanted to really scope in, like, I've got my own API, it's got its own set of rate limiting rules and what have you. And
exactly that. I mean, so there are three ways you can go about it. Three ways, I would say. One is you use the plugins that we offer, basically, and with defaults that we think are applicable to the widest range of apps. Two, many of the plugins that we build come with sets and settings, right? So you can change, the amount of requests per period of time. What is period of time? What is the request cost and all that? So you can adjust this, right? So if you've got an API that does throttling, but let's say it does it per 10 minutes as opposed to a minute, you can set it up within the need to write code and write a plugin. And then three, you can build your own thing. Like, so for example, if you've got any rules, like one example that I think it might apply to many folks is like, if you build your own API, you probably have your own, conventions and your own rules, and maybe even a requirement that every API should do X. You can express that in a plugin, so that when there is a request, you can actually check, right, that the requests you make, like maybe you want to include a header, so that internally when you offer an API, you can track from which org or which part of the org the request initiates. Right? So you could have a plugin that checks that each request in this app does have the request or the header, right? So these are things that you could turn into a plugin specific to your needs that wouldn't apply to anybody else in the world, but that are invaluable to the way you organize your IT.
Got it. Yeah, that's so cool. What's next? What are you thinking? Like, where's this going?
Conquering the world.
Where's the co-pilot? Like, where's, you guys didn't get the memo. Like, where's the?
We use it every day.
Yeah. I was thinking just as we were talking, actually, it's like, I wonder if anyone is going to build, because I would build it if I had time. Like, you kind of want to plug in that enumerates all of the really popular GPT services that are not private, like the OpenAI, like, you know what I mean? So you'd be like, hey, did you know this application is actually making some calls out to like a public ChatGPT? Did you know that? Are you cool with it? Like, because bunch of developers, stuff happens, people put cool stuff in, and like it was easier to get the OpenAI key, like, whatever it is, rather than go through the proper route for the Azure one or the, the lockdown businessy one.
Yeah. I mean, so a while back you asked, like, how do we come up with ideas? It's exactly that. Like, we talk to folks. We talk to folks like yourself. Like, because again, like, I used to be in the partner space for many years. I don't know, 14, 15 years, maybe more. And that is really interesting thing, because like that is really where we get experience. You go out to customers, you hear their needs, and you build things that end up in production. I don't do that for work anymore. I am no longer on projects. So in other words, I kind of miss that part of experience and the customer's needs. And I chose to replace that with regularly talking to folks like you, like other folks, different SIs, ISVs, who actually do the things that I used to do day in, day out, so that we can learn from them. What problems do they have? What's hard? What is, unreasonably tough? And what are different things that we can fix? And this is exactly that, right? So hearing from everyone is like, that's interesting. And then we can combine it with everything that we know internally, combining, direction where we're going, what's interesting, where we are investing, what's going, maybe what will be addressed elsewhere already, maybe what will not be addressed. And we combine all of that, like, hey, that might be an interesting thing to add it in that shape. Or maybe if we talk to 3 other folks, maybe we can adjust it a bit and then make it applicable to a bigger audience, So we combine all of that, but it all stands or falls on basically us doing the legwork and talking to the partners and customers in the space, who eventually are the users of everything that we build.
Yeah.
I think in terms of kind of like short term, medium term, if you like. So short term, as always, is improving onboarding, right? Making it super easy for you to get what you need out of Dev Proxy. So one of the things that we'll be increasing is the use of Dev Proxy Toolkit, which is our VS Code extension. So things like, what version are you on, making sure you got right update, that Dev Proxy is actually running in the background as well. Things like making it easier to create configuration files through snippets, and for us to give you feedback as well when you're building out these config files. It's declarative, right? But it's still something that you need to do. So making that better. We've released integrations with API Center recently as well, which is really interesting. That's kind of moving us into a space where exactly what you said, Tom, like, hey, we've got these APIs, right, that we're using in our organization, but are our apps using the correct APIs? Is my app now using an API that's been deprecated and now there's a new version? Like, how do I know that as a developer? And with Dev Proxy, we kind of sit on the developer side just to say, hey, we can track the requests, right? And we can give you that guidance. And then from an API governance perspective for you and your organization, you can kind of keep that fresh, make sure that your apps are not becoming like, they're being compliant now with the rules that you're wanting to set in your organization around the usage of APIs. So that's something that we'll continue to explore. Again, it's a slightly different area than what we've done in the past, but we're just using things that have been in proxy for a while, and then just, translating that to new areas. So again, say the things that are already there, there's quite a few. If you haven't had a look at them, definitely go check them out. There's a lot of things in there that I think people will find useful. We just haven't maybe got the word out about everything, and things come back, right? One example, we've got a plugin to generate an OpenAPI spec from just the requests that you make.
That's cool. I didn't know that. Okay,
There,
that's
there
useful.
you go.
Yeah.
There you go. So a perfect example of something that's already been there, but then maybe something happens, something gets built, and you go, oh yeah, that's a really cool piece of technology. Okay, how do I use it? I need an OpenAPI spec. Okay, I don't have one of those, so how do I now get one? And again, we're just trying to make it easy so that, say, you've not thought about it right at the beginning, but that shouldn't stop you from leveraging that new technology. Just use Dev Proxy, issue the requests, get your API spec, and then, you can go from there.
Yeah.
So, those kind of things, they always seem to come back, which is really interesting.
That's really cool. I'm joking aside, actually, like Dev Proxy is the co-pilot for developers right now. Like it's that set of tools that helps you do your thing, right? It's all those things you said. It's just like watching the requests, making suggestions, kind of there when you need it. Like it's great. It's really, really good. Gentlemen, thank you very, very much. This has been really interesting. If this is the first time you're hearing about Dev Proxy, definitely go check it out. Where you don't even have to be a developer. Like if you know developers, if you manage a team of developers, like this will, take away a lot of those headaches around non-functional requirements as well. And yeah, if you are in a development team, like definitely go check it out. Put it in all parts of your build process, because you can put it in your pipeline, you can put it in your local machine, just do all the things. And yeah, keep an eye on what these folks are doing, because it's changing every day. Garry, Waldeck, thank you very, very much for your time. If you're finding things like this useful and interesting, please do all the things. Comment and say, like it, subscribe, do all those things, because that means we can make more videos like this. Thanks very much for watching. See you on the next video.